Welcome in. We are taping a very special edition of Clay and Buck. It is the Christmas Eve edition. I am in Israel right now. First of all, Merry Christmas to all of you. I hope you are having fabulous times with your friends and your family, but I also know that a lot of you work even on Christmas Eve, and so we wanted to make sure that we had a special, original Christmas Eve edition of the show, and we thought nothing better than to do it from Israel, given that it is, in fact, the Holy Land. And in particular, one of the first things we did when we got to Israel was we had a tour of the old city of Jerusalem. That's right in the center of Jerusalem. I know many of you would love to go and visit at some point in time. And if you have visited, then you will understand maybe a little bit of what we're talking about. But we had a fabulous guide. Her name, and she is sitting with me here right now, Yael Goodman. She took us all over the old city of Jerusalem for several hours, and we had such a great time that we said, hey, what if we brought Yael on and we asked her all sorts of questions so all of you could understand the incredible knowledge and story she had to tell so we could bring it to all of you. So we bring in Yael Goodman first, and I'll get into her background. But first, just for the bona fides, how much work does it take to become a licensed tour guide in Jerusalem? How does that come about? And how did you come to have the job that you have, where you ended up with me and Allie and Andrew, our crew, taking us around in the center of the old city of Jerusalem? How does that job exist? And kind of give us some sense of that, if you could, to start.
Well, the tour guide course in Israel, it's a rigorous course. It's a 2-year course. And in this 2-year course, you need to learn archaeology and history and geology and everything it takes to just guide people along all of Israel, not only Jerusalem. So it includes 600 hours, academic hours, and
goodness.
80 tours. 80 tours where you tour all over Israel. From those 80 tours, 14 days are dedicated to Jerusalem. So basically what we did in our 3-hour tour in Jerusalem was like a condensed 14 days of what you study in a tour guide course in like 3 hours.
So there's so much to get into, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close, regardless of what your religious faith is, the holy sites for Christians, Jews, and Muslims all are in the centrality of the old city of Jerusalem. For people who have not been before, the Western Wall, the ascension, I guess, of Muhammad for Muslims, and then the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the location of Jesus Christ crucifixion. All of these are within a short little walking. I mean, you could almost, since we got a lot of football fans out there, you could almost basically throw a football from one holy site to another holy site of all three religions. For people who have not been, let's start with the Jewish faith. What is central when you're going around on these tours for people who have not been there before? What stands out that you think they should know about the sites that are important to people of Jewish faith?
So I think for Jews, the most important site is the Western Wall. But the Western Wall is a relic of what the temple used to be.
What is the Western Wall? Because a lot of people have heard of that, and
yeah.
if they're not Jewish, they may not know exactly what it is. So what is the Western Wall? Many people have seen the pictures, but kind of take us into why it's historically relevant.
So the Western Wall is basically a wall of the fortress that was built around Temple Mount. Okay, let's go back a little bit. Temple Mount is the mountain that the temple was on top of it. That's why it's called Temple Mount.
Yes.
I'm using my hands as if people can see me because I'm
That's
used to
how
guiding.
I talk
exactly.
Too. Yes.
So when you go back to the source of Judaism, you go back to that formative moment where Abraham was asked by God to take his loved son Isaac and to bind him and to almost sacrifice him. That takes place on Mount Moriah, which on top of that mountain, the first temple was built. So that is a focal point that goes back 4,000 years. King David chose Jerusalem as the capital, and his son King Solomon builds the first temple on that same location where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. And so the first temple was built over there. That temple is destroyed by the Babylonians and rebuilt again.
That first temple would have been built how many thousands of years ago, roughly? I'm not expecting you to know the exact year, but we're talking about like 2,500, 2,700.
Yes, we're talking 3,000 years ago.
Yep.
We're talking 1,000 years BCE.
Yes.
Okay, roughly.
Okay, so the first temple is built.
The first temple is built. The first temple is destroyed. The Israelites living in the area, they rebel against the Babylonians. And the Babylonians come, they destroy the first temple. We're talking about 586 BCE or BC. We use before Common Era or before Christ.
We can do Christ here,
exactly.
I think, probably on this
let's
show.
go for BC.
Yes.
Exactly. And the Jews are exiled to Babylon, and they come back. Not all of them come back. A lot of them stay in Babylon, which becomes a thriving Jewish community. It's the first Jewish diaspora. But the people who come back build the second temple. And that second temple was renovated by King Herod. King Herod was an appointee of the Romans to come and control in Israel. Because just open brackets, and this also will eventually connect to the story of Jesus,
yes.
the geopolitics around Jesus. Because, everything is about politics in the end, and the geography that you're in, and what decisions different leaders and rulers needed to make in the context of the time. So Herod comes to rule because the Romans understand that there's a unique group of people that lives in the province of Judea, which is what they called Israel at the time. They're monotheistic. They believe in one God, which was absurd. And if you think about it, 2,000 years ago, where everyone was idol worshippers and they believed
the
in
Greeks and the Romans had all of their
multiple
different gods.
Exactly,
yes.
multiple gods. And so the Romans knew that if there would be direct Roman rule, there would be uprising in the province of Judea. And there'll be friction between the Jews and this direct Roman ruler. And so they needed someone from their own. So they choose King Herod, who's also a Jew and who also was raised in Rome. So he can also understand the Jewish traditions and not have any friction with the Jews, but also, do what Rome does. Build a Roman city, a cardo, a theater, all the things that the Romans wanted to see in order to spread their Roman culture. So Herod comes, he sees this temple, and he's like thinking Roman style, Roman architecture. He's like, what do you mean? This isn't a temple. So he shows them what a temple is. So basically, if you can use this imagery, there's a mountain. It's like he takes a shoebox, a rectangular shaped shoebox, and dresses it over the mountain. That is the platform upon which the temple was built. If you fly on a helicopter, it's as big as 12 soccer fields, speaking of sports analogies.
Yes.
It's a massive area because it's a venue where 250,000 Jews are coming 3 times a year to worship. And so he made it. So what is the Western Wall? Back to your original question.
Yeah.
I think when we were together in the old city, I said, every question you have, it will take me time to answer because everything is really complicated and complex with the answers. And so the Western Wall basically is a tiny little part of that massive fortification that was built around Temple Mount. And this is what's exposed of it. And it's closest to where the Holy of Holies was.
And this would be the Western Wall, how many thousands of years old?
2,000 years ago.
2,000
years ago.
This is important because everyone who's listening to us in America, something that's 200 years old, people say, oh my goodness, can you believe that's so old? We're talking about 2,000-year-old wall.
2,000-year-old wall, which probably Jesus came to visit when he came to Jerusalem. This is the wall. People went to the wall after the Second Temple was destroyed.
Yes.
If you were a Jew 2,000 years ago, you would go and worship on the temple. And how would you worship? You had a mediator. You had the priests, the Kohanim. They would take your sacrifice it for you. So there was a mediator between man and God. And the holiest place for Jews, if we're going back to the Jewish question, is the Holy of Holies, is the temple itself.
Yes.
Because only one person can go in once a year, and that is the high priest, and he goes in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and he goes into the Holy of Holies. But when the temple was destroyed, we don't know exactly where the location is. And according to Jewish tradition, only when the Messiah comes, he will rebuild the temple, and that's when the dream of Orthodox Jews, not all Jews feel this way or believe in this, but that's when the priests will come back and everything will come back. So until then, we are prohibited as Jews to even go up to Temple Mount.
So people, as a result, come and they worship at the Western Wall.
Exactly.
And I almost said Wailing Wall because there
Correctly.
is often crying
Exactly.
associated with it.
Right, you go to the wall. Every Jew I know has grandparents who dreamt to come to Jerusalem, and you go to the wall, and there's just that moment. Even it doesn't matter how you feel or how religious you are, it's just kind of like a moment, and it's a wall, right? You were there. It's just a wall, but it brings out so much emotion because the amount of energy and prayer that was brought into that wall, you literally feel it.
And so a lot of people put notes. People may have seen or heard about this. it's separated. I didn't know. Women have one entrance, men have another. You're not side by side, but anyone can approach the wall regardless of what their religious or ethnicity might be.
Absolutely. Anyone can go to the wall. Anyone, any religious, any ethnicity. Yes, there is a separation between men and women because it's controlled by the Israeli rabbinical authority, and over there it's a separation between men and women. But I find in my experience of everyone that I guided, the Western Wall is really what moves people the most.
I wanted you to tell me about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and why it is a integral part of the Christian faith. But I hadn't really thought about this before. Maybe I should have. Based on how old the city is, there is a constant interplay between maybe what the religious story is and what the historic story is. And before we even get to that, you can walk through the old city of Jerusalem, the center here, and there is a pathway that they say is likely to have been what Jesus walked on his way to being crucified. Based on your study, how accurate do you think that pathway is? And I want everybody to understand out there, we're talking about Jesus as a historic figure right now for that pathway, someone who was crucified, that you could follow the history here was really kind of staggering to me. When Christians come and you give them tours, what do they ask about it? How accurate do you think that pathway is for what Jesus may have walked when he was being crucified?
Well, it's a tough question to answer only because I'm thinking about the Christians out there who are listening to me.
Yeah, on Christmas Eve. No
on
pressure.
Christmas Eve, exactly. So no pressure. Firstly, I'll say that a path that has been walked for over 1,000 years, that's where the sanctity is.
Yes.
Does it really matter if it happened or not? Because you're right, there is a question. We have the religion and we have the facts and the history and the archaeology. Sometimes they don't mesh together. Not for Jews, not for Christians, not for Muslims. So, as a guide in Jerusalem who guides different demographics, some more religious, some less religious, I try to really be sensitive to the audience with my answer. What I can tell you, most likely. Do I know for sure? No.
I mean,
Because
isn't that
the
kind
point-
of staggering, though? Sorry to cut
Yeah.
you off, but the fact that something that is so iconic and embedded in common thought, it was really kind of staggering to me to think. We know that there had to be a pathway, right? And it's rare that there is something that is this old. Again, I think this is important. Everyone in the United States, if a building is 200 years old, you are like, this is so old. Can you believe we still have this? We met a guy whose family has lived in the same house in the center of Jerusalem for 800 years. I mean, the same house for 800 years. I mean, I always think it's funny when you go to England or something and there are bars, literal pubs, that are older than the United States of America. They've been serving beer there longer than our country has existed. So my point on this is, as we're walking through the old city of Jerusalem, the idea that you could be on the same sort of pathway in any way, or you said earlier that Jesus himself could have walked down to the Western Wall. It would have been there when he was there. I think is really eye-opening for many people. So the idea that there is this pathway and that it's right there, and you can even see, I mean, I know for many Christians, these are the steps that Jesus would have walked. It's marked. You said for 1,000 years people have been trying to figure this out, and we'll get into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre here in a moment, but that is the idea of that church is that it's built right on top of where they would have crucified everyone. And that's where the walk ends.
Exactly. So the 14 stations of the cross basically start in the place that was believed where Pontius Pilate came to Jerusalem, and that's where he sentenced Jesus to death.
Yes.
Totally makes sense because Herod built that building beforehand. And every building that Herod built, the Roman governors who would come after him would live in those facilities because they were good, they were big, they were fancy.
Because you're looking at the historic record and considering the
Yes.
biblical record and trying to figure out how do we determine the likely elements here. And it is, as all archaeology is, oftentimes a best guess scenario because the records are only as good as the records are.
Exactly. And you have to cross-reference, and you have to cross-reference with archaeology and with history and with a bunch of other stuff. So basically, roughly the 14 stations, probably could be that path, because it does go from point A, for where Pontius Pilate sentences Jesus to death, and to point B, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and somewhere along the way is the path that he walked.
And there's only so many ways to go for the. I mean, it's a
Exactly.
relatively small distance, right, for people who have not been to Jerusalem.
Exactly. And we know the topography doesn't change.
Right.
The streets, the alleys, the homes, they may change, but the topography doesn't change.
In other words, if you got to go uphill to get something,
Exactly.
there's only so many ways to go up that hill.
Exactly. So we went uphill. Or, for example, the walls of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a Jewish city in the time that Jesus was executed. It was controlled by the Romans politically, but religiously it was a Jewish city. So anything that had to do with the death had to be done outside the city. And so we were touring Jerusalem in the walls of the Ottoman period of 1539.
Yes.
But remember when I stopped in that place and I said, right now we're exiting the city in the time of Jesus. So at some point, Jesus walks outside the city in order to go to the Golgotha, to the Calvary, which was outside of the city. And it's very deceiving because today we're in the city, right? The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in the center of Jerusalem, but we need to imagine it that it was outside of Jerusalem. And so we get to the Calvary, which was kind of like the Golgotha in Aramaic. Golgolet is a skull. So when people come to this hill, they see like a hill that looks like a skull, which is associated with execution. This is probably the place where they executed everyone. And right by the side of it, they revealed, archaeologically speaking, Second Temple burial. It's a specific style that's exactly how Jesus would have buried 2,000 years ago. We have style of burials that change. First Temple burial is different than Second Temple burial. And we went into that place in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and we saw the caves where you can place the body, roll the stone over, and read the scriptures and really see that it was there.
There is now a church there, and we'll work our way towards it. The idea that they have in the church is that they have pinpointed the location of the cross, and then of where Jesus dies inside of that during that crucifixion. Okay, and the church is fascinating because there are multiple different orthodoxies, different denominations, basically, that have different aspects of the church. I've been in a lot of cathedrals. I've been in a lot of churches in my life. I've never seen one that has this many different orthodoxies, this many different methods that they're celebrating with. So let me start with this. What are the different groups that are represented inside of this church? And let me clarify for people out there listening. This is like you have a Catholic church with a Baptist church with a Seventh-day Adventist church, all these different denominations all rolled into one. I've never seen anything like this. What are the denominations, and how in the world did this come to be?
Well, we have 5 different denominations in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre from 3 different continents. So it's insane.
Yes.
You know, when I try to explain this to a Jewish audience, I say it's kind of like putting Reform Orthodox conservatives and like Iraqi and Yemenite Jews all in one synagogue. We would never get along, kind of like what you said right now.
I mean, the idea of having Catholics and Baptists in the same building and each of them controlling a different portion of the building is a way, I think, of kind of illustrating that, right?
Absolutely.
So I cut you off, but so what does it look like?
So what it looks like, well, we have the Greek Orthodox.
Uh-huh.
We have the Franciscans, who are the arm of the Catholic, the Pope. We have the Armenians. They have a very big territory over there. The Coptics, which are the Egyptians, and the Syrianic Orthodox, which we were lucky to visit their church, the Aramaic-speaking Syrianic church, where they have that small room.
Yes.
So every denomination, according to the power that they had at the time, how much real estate they have in the church, what times of prayer they have, they're all very much divided in how they pray. Now, this is also a unique example, how you have a Western church, the Franciscans, okay, the Catholic Church, together with all the rest are Eastern churches. So you have like one Catholic, and then the other are Eastern churches, but also. And I think we talked this a lot about in our tour, how like it's much harder to get along within your family
Often.
as opposed to outside. So like Jews and Muslims and Christians kind of get along in the old city, but like what happens inside that church? So how they get along, basically, is something that the Ottoman Empire decided in the middle of the 19th century. It's called the status quo. They just realized they were all fighting between them, between the churches.
Over this, who has what inside of the church.
And this all started in the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. Okay, someone stole the star of that indicated where Jesus was born, and a big war started from that war. Now, if you zoom out, a lot of wars started because of religion. You blame religion for a lot of wars. But really, it's a lot of undertow that went on years and years beforehand. And that religious reason is kind of like the match that sparks the war. But regardless, the Ottomans said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We're going to go to every church in the Holy Land, in Israel, and we're going to see where every denomination prays right now. So, like, for example, you're Armenian, this is your area, this is your time of prayer, this is where you have to clean, and cleaning is an honor in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. People don't fight who doesn't clean, people want to clean it. And the Greek Orthodox. And so kind of like deciding what hours and what time, and everything that they wrote at the time that they wrote it had to freeze in time. It's called the status quo. So if you've been to Israel, you know the famous story of the ladder outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that's still there since 1856. And even more crazy is this aluminum ladder between April and May that they take out and just put it. It's dysfunctional. People don't climb on it or fix something. It just stands there because it's written in the status quo, which shows you how things just need to freeze in order to work. Just like stop there. You know, you don't move anymore. This is how it's going to work. And it does. And it's unbelievable because the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a microcosm of Jerusalem, the Old City. You know, it's kind of like a little area where you can see where all these different denominations get along, or I wouldn't say get along, they parallel live, which is huge.
So inside of this church is they basically, the Crusaders came 1,000 years after Jesus. You can correct me. This is a rough historical record. And they decided they wanted to build a church on the scene, basically, of the crucifixion.
Well, the original church was built by Constantine in 335.
Yep.
So
then it was destroyed.
And it was destroyed, and the church that we saw is Crusader.
Yes.
And it's a third of the size of the Byzantine church that was built by St. Helen, Constantine's mom.
Which is crazy because it's a big church already to think about the size of the church that was built that far back.
Yes.
So the initial church is built 300 some odd years after the crucifixion. And the idea is that they have built this church on the scene of the site of where Jesus was crucified.
Exactly. The chronology of archaeology of Christian sites in Israel is similar in many different sites. The event that took place, the early Christian community that preserved that place and remembered where it was. And then think about it. From the moment that Jesus is crucified until the Byzantine come into power is 300 years.
Right.
That's a long time to preserve a place. So St. Helen, Constantine mom, she comes and looks for those places, and that's where the churches are built. Those churches are destroyed, unfortunately, and rebuilt by the Crusaders. So a lot of Christian sites in Israel, this is their story. The event that took place, the early Christian community that guarded these places in their memory from father to son, and the churches that were built afterwards over that. And so we have a very good indication as to where these churches are, combined with the archaeology around it.
Based on what you've seen, do you think that church is in the place where and by the way, it wasn't just Jesus. There were lots of people being crucified back in those days, which is important. Do you think that they built it roughly where the crucifixions were likely to have occurred?
Yes, I mean, I don't want to make any Protestants upset because they have a different location in Jerusalem.
Yes.
It's called the Garden Tomb.
Yes.
And so there are two locations of where the crucifixion and resurrection took place. Listen, ever since I'm a little girl, my mother's from Oklahoma City. Let's open this up. My mother's from Oklahoma City. She comes from a Roman Catholic family, partly Native American. So, you know, I'm like, I have a mess of a background. And my grandmother was a devout Catholic woman. And every time she would come to Jerusalem, my mother would say, "Sugar doll, take her to the church." And like, I just knew one church, and that was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So ever since I'm like 7 years old, I walk my grandma to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so I have a very deep connection to that church as a young Jewish girl in Jerusalem taking her Catholic grandmother to this church.
Yes.
In my tour guide course, I realized the necessity of these different communities to have different locations. You know, religion comes with logistics, and you got to take that under consideration. And the church, the Garden Tomb, is located outside the walls today. And they have their own story and their own area, and I get it. But I definitely think that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the location.
Okay, so we've talked about the historic sites for Jews, for Christians, also a historic site for Muslims. And I'm not as familiar with this one. We mentioned that you can walk in and see that, whether you're a Christian or a Jew, for those two holy sites. Not so for the Muslim site.
Well, the Muslims, listen, the Muslims, if you're a Muslim, you can go up to Al-Aqsa. when I say Temple Mount, it's a very Jewish way of referring to Temple Mount because it referred to the temple on the mountain.
Yes.
Right. So when I talk about it in a Muslim framework, I'll use the word El Aqsa or Dome of the Rock. Now, they can go up whenever they want. Remember, we went up. We saw where they can go up, and the police stopped us. You can't go up from here. But there are times, there are certain days and times that we can go up from a different place. And the absurdity in Jerusalem and things that people don't understand is that the area of El Aqsa, of what we call Temple Mount, is controlled by the Waqf, which is the holy entity of the Muslims. And they decide what times people can come up and down to visit. And the people who implement what the Muslim authority decides are the Israeli police.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay. Now, this is parallel living. This is understanding that there is a holy site and that we need to police it a little bit. And in order to go up, you need to make sure, they have very strict rules as to what you're allowed to bring. You're not allowed to bring any holy scriptures. You're not allowed to wear any religious identifications like a yarmulke for a Jew or a cross outside and a necklace. And you're allowed to visit the sites, and it's an incredible place to visit. We can go on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but the hours are very specific. And so it's much more controlled up on El Aqsa.
What happened there?
So according to
the Muslim
according
faith.
to the Quran, in chapter 17, Surah 17, Muhammad goes on a night journey. And on this night journey, he gets to a place called El Aqsa. It doesn't say where it is geographically. It just says El Aqsa, which in Arabic means the place that is furthest. And from this place, he ascends to the heavens from this big rock to have a negotiation with Allah. How many prayers must a Muslim have a day? And he comes back with the answer 5. So the Golden Dome indicates the location of that ascension and arrival back. So it's not a mosque, the Golden Dome. The Mosque of Al-Aqsa is like right beside it. One was built in 691 AD and the other one was built in 720 AD. The father built the first one, the son built the second one. And that's how they established the third holiest place in Islam in the world.
Having lived in Jerusalem your whole life, how, and obviously October 7th is 14 months ago, continues to be incredibly jarring and impactful for Jews around the world and many people who are not Jewish. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about where we are right now in society on this Christmas Eve of 2024 when it comes to Jews, Muslims, Christians being able to get along, especially in Jerusalem, which is the central location for all three of those religions in many ways?
Well, first of all, we do. I'm an optimist. I'm always an optimist. My heart has been shattered and broken over and over since October 7th because we're still in war. It's still happening. Our heart broke on October 7th, and it breaks every day, and every soldier that is killed out in battle, or every casualty that we have. But life in Jerusalem exists. We parallel live all the time, especially in the Old City. So, listen, it's not like kumbaya, let's go to each other's houses and we'll have tea together. It just doesn't work. But the parallel living exists. The mutual interest to bring back tourism and income is a mutual interest for everyone.
Yes.
That's where I get along with my Arab colleagues in the Old City and my Christian colleagues in the Old City. We all want the same thing. We want people to come, we want people to visit, and we just want to live our life. On the day-to-day, people just want to live their life. They want to wake up in the morning, go to work, hug their kids goodbye, and come back. That's it. So if you're thinking about the level of just the person-to-person, walking in the street, buying some stuff, I'm very optimistic about that. It's the radicals, it's the politics, it's the higher up. That's where it doesn't work.
For people out there listening to us right now, and again, it's Christmas Eve, who may be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever their religious faiths are, maybe they're not very religious at all. Maybe they don't have a particular religion that they feel connected to. Why should they come to Jerusalem? What do you think people of all different denomination and walks of life would benefit from having spent your whole life teaching so many people about the history of Jerusalem?
In my experience, anyone who came to Jerusalem would always tell me, I feel like I'm home. Whether you're religious, whether you're not, you just come to Jerusalem and you just get this feeling like something on the inside feels right. What was the rest of your question?
I think so many, like, for instance, my grandparents came to Jerusalem when I was, maybe before I was born, when I was super young. And it was a lifelong dream of theirs as evangelical Christians to come and get to see Jerusalem. I think there are a lot of people listening to
Yeah.
us like that right now. I think there are also Jews and Muslims who are listening to us right now. I think there are people on this Christmas Eve that don't have a particular religious faith. My contention is that I think they would all benefit by coming and seeing Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Basically, no matter what your background is.
It really doesn't matter. To come and see a city that has 4,000 years of history where, all the stories that we all grew up on, if it's Abraham, if it's David, if it's Jesus, if it's Muhammad, every religion, the basic of the story, even if you're not religious, we all grew up on these stories and
Yes.
what happened over here. And to see how they're all intertwined and combined in one city. I mean, Jerusalem sounds like a place that is separated. Like you hear Jerusalem, Christians, Jews, Muslims, it sounds like separated. Jerusalem is connective tissue. You feel connected. It has a connective. You go there and you feel connected to yourself, to the ground, to the stories, to other people too. People open up to you. You walk around, and every time I guided people in Jerusalem, people would meet someone they knew from the past in Jerusalem. There's like this insane energy in Jerusalem that you just say to yourself, how have I never been here before? I can't believe I only came right now.
I encourage all of you to come on this Christmas Eve. I hope you are having fantastic times with your friends and your family. Yael Goodman, Oklahoma-based family, born and raised, however, in Jerusalem. This was amazing. I appreciate the time. I know people loved it. If by chance they're listening and they want a tour, how could they find you?
Wow. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I have a website with my running tours. It's runjlm, like Jerusalem.com. So you can always reach me at my website.
I bet we're going to send some people to you. Runjlm.com.
And as I always, say to my family in Oklahoma and Massachusetts, shalom, y'all. That's I always have a sign of my mom that says, shalom, y'all.
This has been fantastic. It's the Christmas Eve edition of Clay and Buck.